Imagine a single moment so charged with cruelty and injustice that it sparks a revolution, a moment that forces an entire community to confront the dark underbelly of a system meant to protect its most vulnerable. Picture a young boy, barely 9 years old, stepping into a place where he expects comfort and care, only to be met with biting disdain and harsh, discriminatory words. Now, ask yourself, how could a trusted caregiver, someone entrusted with nurturing the health of children, become the very source of their pain? This is not just another sad story, it's a catalyst that has ignited a firestorm of questions about accountability, racism, and systemic failure. What if the whispers of injustice hidden in the halls of our schools were finally given voice? What if one brave family decided that silence was no longer an option and embarked on a quest to expose the deeply entrenched wrongs within the very institutions meant to shield our children? As you listen to this story, imagine the gut-wrenching humiliation of a child whose only crime was being different, a child whose appearance, culture, and personal hygiene were unfairly scrutinized and ridiculed by someone in power. Picture the chilling moment when a school nurse, cloaked in authority, deems a young soul dirty, setting off a chain reaction that leaves scars far deeper than those visible on the surface. What if this wasn't an isolated incident, but a disturbing pattern that had been allowed to fester in the shadows for years? Consider the gut reaction you might feel, knowing that the very systems designed to care for our children could hide such blatant abuse. And now, imagine the brave steps taken by a determined family, refusing to be silenced by institutional indifference, gathering evidence, unearthing hidden truths, and confronting a network of discrimination that spans decades and multiple school districts. Could their relentless pursuit of justice be the spark needed to dismantle a long-standing culture of neglect and prejudice? What does it mean when those in authority protect themselves instead of the vulnerable? How deep does the rot go in a system that sweeps injustice under the rug time and again? And most importantly, can one act of defiance against cruelty be enough to ignite a movement that brings about lasting, transformative change? As these questions swirl in your mind, get ready to embark on an emotional journey filled with heartbreak, hope, and the unyielding determination of a community that refuses to accept anything less than justice. This is a story that challenges us all to rethink what we know about power, responsibility, and the true meaning of compassion in our schools. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of secrecy and silence, and discover whether one family's fight can indeed become a beacon for change, a rallying cry for every voice that has been ignored for too long. Carter hesitated at the entrance of the school nurse's office, his stomach churning with both discomfort and apprehension. At just 9 years old, he had felt unwell all morning, and his hope for a kind word or gentle care was quickly met with an icy reception. Inside the sterile, white-walled room sat Ms. Hartley, the school nurse, whose back was turned as she meticulously organized papers on her desk. "Excuse me, Miss Hartley, I don't feel so good," Carter murmured softly, his voice quivering with uncertainty. As Ms. Hartley slowly swiveled in her chair, Carter's anticipation of comfort was dashed by the hard set of her features. Her eyes narrowed as she regarded him with unmistakable disdain. "What seems to be the problem?" she snapped, her tone clipped and devoid of sympathy. Carter shifted awkwardly in his seat. "My stomach hurts," he mumbled. Before he could explain further, Miss Hartley's nostrils flared. "When was the last time you took a shower, young man?" she demanded sharply. Carter's confusion deepened. I took one this morning, ma'am," he replied timidly. A scoff escaped Ms. Hartley's lips. "I find that hard to believe." "Look at the state you're in," she declared. Carter's eyes darted downward, searching in vain for any hint of dirt or disarray. His clothes were neat, carefully chosen by his mother that very morning, and even his sneakers, though not new, were spotless. Yet, Miss Hartley began circling him with a predatory scrutiny. "Your hair is a mess, and what is that smell?" "It's as if you've been rolling in dirt," she hissed. Carter's cheeks flushed with humiliation as he felt the room shrink around him. Outside the door, a small group of students had gathered, their curious faces peering in through the window. One of them whispered, "I've never seen such a dirty child in all my years." Miss Hartley's voice rose, dripping with contempt as she added, "Do your parents even care about hygiene?" Tears welled up in Carter's eyes, each word a searing cut of shame. "You're filthy," she spat, her expression contorted with disgust. "Absolutely filthy. No wonder you're feeling sick, it's probably all the germs you're carrying." Trembling and desperate to escape the crushing weight of humiliation, Carter could only stand there, his young heart breaking under the barrage of cruelty. What he didn't know was that this painful encounter would spark a firestorm, one that would soon shatter the walls of silence that had long shielded Ms. Hartley and expose a deep-rooted injustice within the school system. As Carter emerged from the nurse's office, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted. The buzz of whispered conversations spread like wildfire among the students, each recounting fragments of what they had witnessed. Carter's face burned with shame, and every lingering gaze made him feel even more isolated. In class, he sank into his seat, shoulders hunched as if trying to vanish into the background. Familiar faces now seemed alien and hostile, and the once friendly chatter was replaced by awkward greetings and uneasy silences. During lunch, Carter's stomach churned at the thought of entering the cafeteria, and even his closest friends appeared distant. At recess, he found himself alone on the periphery of the playground. The usual laughter around the jungle gym was replaced by an eerie quiet, a stark reminder of the social isolation that had suddenly become his reality. When the final bell rang, Carter felt a fleeting surge of relief that was quickly replaced by anxiety over facing his parents. His small backpack seemed to weigh him down with every step towards the school bus. On the ride home, Carter pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the familiar streets of Maple Grove blur past. The events of the day played on an endless loop in his mind, each repetition deepening the sting of shame. By the time the bus screeched to a halt at his stop, Carter's eyes were red-rimmed and his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. He slowly trudged up the driveway, dreading the inevitable moment when his mother would ask about his day. When he reached for the doorknob, he took a deep, steadying breath, bracing himself for the conversation that would forever alter his family's life. Little did he know that the echoes of Ms. Hartley's cruelty were about to reverberate far beyond the school walls. Inside their modest home, Carter recounted his painful encounter to his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. Initially, their expressions shifted from concern to disbelief and then hardened into simmering anger. "You call her dirty?" Mrs. Simmons repeated in a trembling voice, her eyes glistening with a mix of fury and heartbreak. "Our son, whom we raised to take pride in his appearance," she whispered, barely holding back her tears. Mr. Simmons paced the living room, his fists clenched at his sides, his voice low and dangerous. "This is completely unacceptable, a school nurse humiliating a child like this. We must do something." The tension in the room was palpable as Carter's parents grappled with the full implications of what had transpired. The revelation that their son had been subjected to such cruel and discriminatory treatment by someone in a trusted position ignited a fierce determination in them. "We can't let this stand," Mrs. Simmons declared with resolve. "We must act, not only for Carter but for every child who might be suffering at the hands of such abuse." That very night, Mr. and Mrs. Simmons gathered around their kitchen table, their voices hushed yet intense as they discussed their options. The soft glow of the overhead light cast long shadows across their worried faces. "We could go directly to the principal," Mr. Simmons suggested, "and demand that this nurse be immediately removed from her position." Mrs. Simmons shook her head firmly. "No, we need to be strategic. If we confront them too aggressively, they might just sweep it all under the rug. We have to gather evidence and build a solid case." The gravity of the situation settled over them. If Ms. Hartley could treat Carter this way, how many other children had suffered silently? By dawn, they had reached a decision: they would request a meeting with the school administration. At the appointed time, the Simmons family arrived at the principal's office, the air thick with anticipation and trepidation. Principal Reed, a man whose face was carefully masked with professional neutrality, greeted them. He settled into his creaking leather chair as the meeting began, but it soon became evident that the administration was more interested in protecting their own interests than in addressing the Simmons' serious concerns. "We take all allegations very seriously," Principal Reed assured them, his tone smooth but his eyes betraying a hint of unease as he deflected their pointed questions. "I cannot discuss personnel matters in detail, but rest assured, we will investigate this incident thoroughly." Mrs. Simmons leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Explain this to us, Principal Reed. We've heard similar stories from other parents. How many complaints have been brushed aside?" For a moment, the principal's confident composure faltered. He cleared his throat, reaching for a glass of water with a trembling hand. I cannot comment on other cases or the records of our staff. But I promise that we will conduct a full investigation." The Simmons exchanged a determined glance as the meeting drew to a close. Mr. Simmons' voice was icy as he addressed Principal Reed one last time, "See that you do. If we don't see real action, our next step will be to take this directly to the school board." Mrs. Simmons squeezed his hand, both of them silently vowing that they would not rest until justice was served. Unbeknownst to the Simmons family, their quiet act of defiance was about to unleash a storm. Their fight for justice would reveal a web of discrimination and neglect that extended far beyond Carter's experience, shaking the very foundations of Maple Grove's educational system. Days later, as the school board meeting convened in a cramped conference room, a heavy silence descended over the gathered crowd. Mr. Simmons stepped forward, his voice steady but charged with emotion as he presented a meticulously organized binder filled with testimonies and records documenting a long history of abusive behavior. "We are here to present evidence of a sustained pattern of discriminatory treatment by Nurse Hartley," he declared, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Board member Alice Morgan leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concern. "How did this happen under our watch?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Mr. Simmons continued, detailing an incident involving a group of minority students who had been denied proper care, an event that had been followed by a food poisoning outbreak. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelations pressing down on everyone present. Board President David Simmons, no relation to the family, but a man whose expression softened with empathy, set his pen down with a trembling hand. "It is clear that we have failed in our oversight," he said gravely. "I propose that we immediately initiate a formal, independent investigation into these serious allegations." Relief mingled with continued anger among the parents, who shouted questions demanding answers about how such behavior had gone unchecked for so long. As the meeting closed, the Simmons family walked out with a bittersweet sense of victory. They had been heard, but the road ahead was long and fraught with uncertainty. Later that evening, as the Simmons huddled together in their living room, they transformed their kitchen table into a makeshift war room. Laptops, notepads, and cups of cooling coffee were scattered across the surface as they pored over every piece of evidence they could find. They scoured the internet, made phone calls, and pieced together a timeline of incidents that spanned several years. What they uncovered was deeply disturbing. Ms. Hartley's online presence was minimal, and her work history was shrouded in mystery. The school's website offered nothing more than a generic bio and a smiling photograph that seemed to mock their efforts. As the night wore on, their search widened. They combed through local news archives and educational forums, uncovering a faint lead, an article in an obscure local newspaper titled "Local School Nurse Resigns Amid Parent Complaints." The article was brief and offered no names, but the details sent chills down their spines. Allegations of harsh treatment, discriminatory comments, and neglect of student health were detailed with unnerving precision. Mr. Simmons' voice shook as he read the article aloud. Multiple parents reported that their children were humiliated and targeted, especially those of color, he said. Mrs. Simmons' eyes widened in grim realization. The dates match up. This was just before Nurse Hartley started here, she whispered. It became clear to the Simmons that this was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern that had been allowed to fester in the shadows for years. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through their kitchen window, the Simmons sat surrounded by printouts, notes, and an ever-growing list of names, former colleagues, administrators, and parents from other schools who might hold the key to unraveling Miss Hartley's past. With each new piece of evidence, a sickening feeling took root in their stomachs. How many children had suffered? How many complaints had been ignored, brushed aside, or even concealed? Most chilling of all was the discovery that Miss Hartley had managed to move from one school to another, leaving a trail of hurt and humiliation in her wake. The Simmons knew their fight was far from over. They steeled themselves for the battles ahead, determined to unearth every hidden truth and expose the layers of bureaucracy and willful ignorance that had allowed Miss Hartley's harmful practices to continue unchecked. Their investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern that spanned multiple school districts over more than a decade. In each district, formal complaints had been made, internal investigations had been conducted, and, ultimately, Miss Hartley had quietly resigned or been transferred, never facing any real consequences. One particularly chilling discovery emerged from her second district. There, Miss Hartley had been accused of deliberately administering the wrong medication to a student with severe allergies. The incident was hushed up, the family was paid off, and Miss Hartley was discreetly reassigned to another school. As the Simmons pored over the damning evidence, a grim realization settled over them. Miss Hartley's actions had not been ignored, they had been actively concealed by an institution more concerned with avoiding scandal than protecting its children. Emboldened by the weight of their evidence, the Simmons began reaching out to other families in Maple Grove. Their investigation had sparked something larger than themselves, a collective outcry against injustice. Phone calls started coming in. One evening, a distraught mother called, her voice trembling as she recounted her daughter's traumatic experience with Nurse Hartley when she was just 7 years old. "My daughter's hair was labeled unkempt and dirty," the mother said, her tone a mix of anger and sorrow. "She refused to go to school for weeks afterward." This first call opened the floodgates. In the days that followed, the Simmons received a steady stream of emails, voicemails, and text messages from parents recounting new facets of Miss Hartley's behavior. One father spoke of his son being denied an inhaler during a severe asthma attack, with the nurse dismissing his distress as mere attention-seeking. A former student recalled how Nurse Hartley had made cruel remarks about the smell of her lunch, which led to relentless teasing from classmates. With each new account, a pattern of discrimination emerged, one that disproportionately targeted Black and minority students, focusing on their appearance, hygiene, and cultural differences. The Simmons realized they needed to organize a way to support these families and amplify their voices. They reached out to local community leaders and arranged a meeting at the public library. The turnout was overwhelming, the room filled to capacity, with parents and former students spilling into the hallways. That night, as individuals shared their painful experiences, a palpable sense of solidarity emerged. Tears were shed, anger was voiced, and, most importantly, a community long silenced by fear finally found its voice. By the end of the meeting, a support group had formed, a coalition dedicated not only to addressing Ms. Hartley's behavior but also to tackling the broader issues of discrimination and systemic neglect within the school system. The evidence was damning, dozens of incidents over many years, all pointing to a pattern of abuse that could no longer be ignored. As the Simmons looked out at the sea of faces in that crowded library, they knew the fight ahead would be long and challenging. Yet, they also knew they were no longer alone. The voices of those who had been silenced were now united in a powerful chorus demanding accountability, change, and justice. In response to the mounting pressure, the school board meeting soon descended into chaos. Parents flooded the small conference room, their voices raised in unison as they demanded answers. Principal Reed's practiced smile faltered as he took in the unexpected crowd. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of the evidence. Mr. Simmons stepped forward once more, his voice steady yet filled with raw emotion. "We are here today to present undeniable evidence of a long-standing pattern of discriminatory behavior by Nurse Hartley," he declared, gesturing to a thick binder that held pages of meticulously organized records and testimonies. With every detail laid out before them, the accounts of racial bias, neglect, and cruelty spanning multiple school districts, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Board member Alice Morgan leaned in, her eyes searching for answers. "How did we miss this?" she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Mr. Simmons responded coldly, "Because our system has been complicit in sweeping these complaints under the rug." The revelation struck a chord with everyone present, and the board president, David Simmons, finally broke the silence. "We clearly have failed in our duty of care," he admitted, his voice trembling with regret. "I propose that we immediately place Nurse Hartley on administrative leave and launch an independent investigation." Relief rippled through the community, yet the battle was far from over. The Simmons left the meeting with a bittersweet victory. While they had managed to force the administration's hand, they knew that real systemic change would require relentless perseverance. In the following weeks, the momentum of the investigation continued to build. The Simmons living room transformed into a war room as they, along with other affected families, gathered evidence and compiled records. Every scrap of information, from school records and medical reports to personal testimonies, became part of a damning portrait of years of neglect and discrimination. Word of their investigation spread like wildfire through Maple Grove, and soon more families stepped forward with their own stories of abuse. The school board, now facing intense public pressure, attempted to settle the matter out of court. Carefully worded legal documents were delivered, promising policy changes and sensitivity training. But the families, unified in their resolve, refused to be placated by empty promises. "We're not interested in a quick fix," Mr. Simmons declared at a subsequent meeting with school officials. "We demand accountability and real, lasting change. Anything less is unacceptable." As the legal preparations advanced, a sense of anticipation gripped the entire community. The day the class action lawsuit was officially filed sent shock waves through Maple Grove. Local news outlets scrambled to cover the story, and social media buzzed with reactions from residents and outsiders alike. For the families involved, this was a moment of vindication, a chance to transform individual pain into a collective force for change. Yet, even as the legal battle took center stage, another dramatic twist unfolded. Ms. Hartley, the nurse at the heart of the controversy, began facing her own reckoning. Investigators delved deeper into her past, uncovering a trail of misconduct that stretched back far beyond her current employment. Reports emerged from her previous schools, accounts of discriminatory remarks, neglectful behavior, and even allegations of falsified medical records and mishandling of student medications. Former colleagues, emboldened by the surge of public scrutiny, came forward with harrowing details of her conduct. One former administrator recalled a meeting from nearly 2 decades ago where Ms. Hartley had made overtly racist remarks about the students in her care. As this testimony was revealed, the courtroom and the community alike fell silent. The evidence was overwhelming. Ms. Hartley's actions were not isolated incidents but part of a larger, systemic problem of institutional neglect and bias. The trial that followed was as intense as it was emotional. In a packed courtroom, Mr. Simmons and the other affected families took the stand, their voices steady as they recounted incident after incident of abuse. One testimony described how a young student had been denied proper medical attention, leading to a hospitalization that might have been avoided. Another witness, a former student now in college, spoke of the lasting impact that Ms. Hartley's cruel words had on his self-esteem. As the prosecution methodically built its case, Ms. Hartley's defense attempted to discredit the witnesses, suggesting that the incidents were mere misunderstandings exaggerated by oversensitive parents. But with every testimony, the defense's arguments fell flat against the raw, unfiltered accounts of pain and humiliation. The trial took an unexpected turn when a surprise witness was called, a silver-haired woman who had once been a colleague of Miss Hartley's. With trembling hands and a quavering voice, she recounted a staff meeting where Miss Hartley had casually tossed racist comments about the students. The courtroom fell deathly silent, the weight of her words leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Throughout the trial, it became increasingly evident that Ms. Hartley's actions were symptomatic of a much larger failure within the school system. Minutes turned to hours as internal memos, board meeting minutes, and emails were scrutinized, revealing a disturbing pattern of ignored complaints and systematic cover-ups. The school district's representatives, visibly shaken by the mounting evidence, could no longer hide behind bureaucratic jargon and evasive statements. After days of intense deliberation, the jury finally returned to the courtroom. As the foreman began to read the verdict, time itself seemed to slow down. Each word was laden with the years of struggle, pain, and hope that the community had endured. When the verdict was announced, in favor of the plaintiffs, awarding substantial damages and mandating sweeping changes to the school district's policies, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of gasps, cheers, and tears of relief. For Carter and his family, the moment was bittersweet. Justice had been served, yet the scars of his ordeal would remain for a long time to come. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, their voices rising in unison as reporters clamored for statements. Community leaders spoke of a new era of accountability and equality in Maple Grove schools, a promise of change that was now more tangible than ever. However, as the euphoria began to fade, the long-term consequences of this landmark case came into focus. Ms. Hartley's career lay in tatters, her reputation irreparably damaged. Flanked by lawyers and under the relentless barrage of questions and accusations, she left the courthouse with her head bowed, a stark reminder of the personal cost of institutional abuse. Meanwhile, the school board, now under intense public scrutiny, announced emergency meetings to address the systemic issues that had been so glaringly exposed by the trial. In the months that followed, the Simmons family's fight for justice evolved into a broader mission for equality and accountability in education. The journey had taken them through heartbreak and legal battles, but it also sparked meaningful change. Neighborhoods in Maple Grove began holding open discussions about race and privilege, local bookstores prominently featured titles on anti-racism and social justice, and school board meetings were now overflowing with engaged parents and community members dedicated to ensuring that no child would ever have to endure what Carter had experienced. Carter's story, once a painful memory of humiliation and isolation, had grown into a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. Invitations for speaking engagements arrived, and reporters reached out, eager to learn more about the journey that had transformed individual suffering into a catalyst for systemic change. One evening, as Mrs. Simmons sat with Carter in their living room, a space now adorned with supportive messages and newspaper clippings chronicling their progress, she looked at him with a mix of pride and tenderness. "Remember, Carter," she said softly, "the most powerful thing we can do is speak up and stand together. That's how real change happens." Carter's eyes, though still shadowed by past pain, gleamed with a new determination. "I think I'm ready," he replied slowly. "If it means that no other kid has to go through what I did, then I'm in this for the long haul." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Maple Grove, the Simmons family felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their journey had taught them that the road to equality was long and fraught with obstacles, but every step forward was a victory for Carter, for every child who had suffered in silence, and for a community determined to reclaim its dignity. The Simmons battle was far from over. The legal challenges, community discussions, and systemic reforms were just the beginning. Each day brought new hurdles, but also new opportunities to shine a light on hidden injustices. With each passing moment, the collective resolve of Maple Grove grew stronger, echoing the belief that together, they could forge a future where every student was treated with respect, compassion, and fairness. As our story comes to a close, we're left with so many questions that demand our attention and action. What would you do if you saw injustice right before your eyes? How far are we willing to go to protect the ones we love? The journey of young Carter and his family isn't just a tale of hardship, it's a powerful call to action for every parent, educator, and community member who believes that every child deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Now, more than ever, it's clear that change starts with us. Carter's experience exposes a dark truth hidden within the very institutions we trust to nurture our children. His story challenges us to rethink what we accept as normal and urges us to stand up against a system that often turns a blind eye to discrimination and neglect. If you feel a stirring in your heart, a call to do better, then this story is for you. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, a spark of defiance can ignite a beacon of hope. I invite you to join this movement of awareness and accountability. Your voice matters. Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below, tell us what you think about the changes that need to be made in our schools, and how we can collectively ensure that no child is ever made to feel unloved or unworthy again. Let's create a community where every story of injustice leads to action, where every voice, no matter how small, contributes to a chorus demanding real change. If Carter's journey has inspired you, if you believe that a system built on neglect and discrimination must be overhauled, then don't let this be the end of the conversation. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so that you never miss another story that challenges the status quo and drives us toward a more just society. By joining our community, you're not just watching a video, you're taking a stand with us. Think about it, every comment, every share, every subscription adds weight to the call for reform. It signals to those in power that we will no longer tolerate silence in the face of injustice. Your engagement can help amplify stories like Carter's, reaching corners of our society that are hungry for truth and change. And who knows? Your own experience or insight might be the catalyst for another life-changing conversation. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that the fight for justice is far from over. Carter's story is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the strength found in unity. The road ahead might be long and challenging, but every step we take together is a step toward a brighter, fairer future. So, if you believe in the power of community and the promise of change, join us. Subscribe, comment, and share this video to spread the message that we are ready to face our challenges head-on. Together, we can transform pain into purpose, injustice into empowerment, and silence into a roar for justice. Let's be the change we want to see, starting today.